When 89-year-old Ellen Morrison heard Whitney Houston's voice on the radio that cold December morning in 1991, she was sitting in her empty kitchen, staring at the bottle of sleeping pills she'd been saving for weeks. For the first time in 22 years, since losing her only son Michael in Vietnam, Ellen had finally worked up the courage to end the pain that had consumed every day of her life. But then that voice, that incredible, soaring voice, filled her silent house with the opening notes of, "I will always love you," and everything changed. If you've ever felt the kind of grief that makes you wonder if life is worth living, you'll understand the miracle that happened in Ellen's kitchen that day. Make sure to subscribe because this story will show you that sometimes hope comes from the most unexpected places, and love truly has no age limit. Ellen Morrison had been preparing to die for 3 weeks, not because she was sick, but because she was tired. Tired of waking up every morning in a house that had once been filled with laughter and was now nothing but echoes. Tired of looking at the photographs on her mantle that showed a life that felt like it belonged to someone else. Tired of the silence that had become her only companion since her daughter-in-law Jennifer had stopped bringing little Sarah for visits 6 months earlier. At 89, Ellen had outlived her husband by 15 years, outlived her son by 22 years, and now it seemed she had outlived her purpose as well. The last conversation with Jennifer had been devastating. "Ellen, I think it's better if we don't visit for a while. Sarah finds these visits too upsetting. All you do is talk about Michael, and she doesn't even remember him. She was only 3 when he died. It's not healthy for any of us." Those words had cut through Ellen like a knife. Sarah was 25 now, a beautiful young woman working as a nurse in Chicago, and Ellen realized with horror that her granddaughter had grown up seeing her only as a sad, broken old woman who lived in the past. But how could she explain that talking about Michael wasn't dwelling in grief? It was keeping him alive. Michael Morrison had been Ellen's miracle baby, born when she was 34 years old, after years of trying to have children. When he was drafted for Vietnam in 1968, Michael was 23 years old, newly married to Jennifer, and full of dreams about becoming a teacher when he returned home. "I'll be back before you know it, Ma," he'd said on the day he left, his young face confident and strong. "I'm going to make you proud." Ellen had watched her beautiful boy board that bus to basic training, not knowing that 14 months later, she'd be receiving a folded flag and a letter of condolence from a government that couldn't even spell his name correctly. The grief of losing Michael had nearly destroyed Ellen's marriage. Her husband Robert dealt with the loss by working longer hours and never mentioning Michael's name. Ellen dealt with it by keeping Michael's room exactly as he'd left it, talking to his photograph every morning, and clinging to Jennifer and baby Sarah as her only connections to the son she'd lost. For 15 years until Robert's death in 1985, their house had been a museum of unspoken sorrow. After Robert died, Ellen thought Jennifer and Sarah would become even more important to her. Instead, she slowly watched them pull away, creating their own life that had less and less room for a grieving grandmother who couldn't let go of the past. By December 1991, Ellen's world had shrunk to the size of her small kitchen. She ate one meal a day, usually canned soup, and spent most of her time listening to her old radio, the same one she and Robert had received as a wedding gift in 1935. The radio was her only companion, filling the silence with talk shows during the day and music at night. She'd stopped answering the phone months ago because the only calls she received were from salespeople or charities asking for money she didn't have to spare. The mailman had stopped expecting her to come to the door. Even her neighbors, once friendly and caring, had given up on the strange old woman who never came outside anymore. That December morning, Ellen had woken up with an unusual sense of clarity and purpose. She'd made her bed, something she hadn't done in weeks. She'd put on her best dress, the navy blue one she'd worn to Robert's funeral. She'd even combed her hair and put on a little lipstick. Then she sat down at her kitchen table with the bottle of sleeping pills she'd been hoarding from various prescriptions over the years. She'd written a simple note: "I'm tired. Please forgive me. Give my love to Sarah." She'd planned to take the pills after listening to one last morning of radio, her final gift to herself before saying goodbye to a world that seemed to have forgotten she existed. But then something extraordinary happened. The radio DJ, a young man with an enthusiastic voice, announced that he was about to play the song that's taking America by storm from Whitney Houston's new movie, The Bodyguard. Ellen had heard the name Whitney Houston before, of course. She knew she was a popular singer, though Ellen preferred the older standards from her generation. But when that voice began to sing, "I Will Always Love You," something inside Ellen's chest began to crack open. The first few notes of the song washed over Ellen like warm water. Whitney's voice, so pure and powerful, seemed to fill every empty corner of Ellen's kitchen, every hollow space in her heart. But it was the words that stopped her cold. If I should stay, I would only be in the way. Ellen's hand, which had been reaching for the pill bottle, froze in midair. So I'll go, but I know I'll think of you every step of the way. The tears began before Ellen even realized she was crying. For the first time in 22 years, she wasn't crying for Michael. She was crying for herself, for the woman she'd been before grief had consumed her, for the love that still lived in her heart despite all the years of pain. As Whitney's voice soared through the chorus, Ellen found herself thinking about Michael in a way she hadn't in years. Not about the day he died, not about the unfairness of losing him, but about the love they'd shared. The bedtime stories, the baseball games, the way he used to dance with her in the kitchen while she cooked dinner. "And I will always love you," Whitney sang, and Ellen realized that this was the truth she'd forgotten. Her love for Michael wasn't something that died with him. It was something that lived on, something that could never be taken away, something that made her life meaningful, even in his absence. When the song ended, Ellen sat in her kitchen for over an hour, the bottle of pills forgotten on the table. For the first time since Robert's death, she felt hungry, really hungry. She opened a can of tomato soup and made herself a grilled cheese sandwich, Michael's favorite lunch when he was little. As she ate, she listened to the radio DJ gush about Whitney Houston, about her incredible voice, about how the song was expected to become one of the biggest hits of all time. Ellen found herself wondering about this young woman who could sing with such power and emotion. What did she know about love and loss that allowed her to put such feeling into those words? That afternoon, Ellen did something she hadn't done in months. She walked to the corner drugstore and bought a package of stationery. Not the fancy kind, just simple white paper with matching envelopes. When the teenage clerk looked at her curiously, Ellen realized how long it had been since she'd spoken to another person. "Thank you, dear," she said, and her own voice sounded strange and rusty from disuse. Back home, Ellen sat at her kitchen table and began to write. The letter came slowly at first, then faster as the words she'd been keeping inside for so long began to pour out onto the paper. "Dear Miss Houston," she began, "my name is Ellen Morrison, and I am 89 years old. This morning I heard you sing 'I Will Always Love You' on the radio, and I want to tell you that your voice saved my life." Ellen wrote about Michael, about Vietnam, about the 22 years of grief that had nearly swallowed her whole. She wrote about the loneliness, about feeling forgotten and useless. She wrote about the bottle of pills and how close she'd come to giving up. But most of all, she wrote about how Whitney's voice had reminded her that love doesn't die. It transforms. "When you sang those words," Ellen wrote, "I remembered that my love for my son is still alive in me. It's not a burden to carry, it's a gift to treasure. Thank you for helping an old woman remember how to live again." Ellen addressed the letter to Whitney Houston, CEO, Arista Records, New York City. She had no idea if a famous singer would ever see a letter from an unknown 89-year-old woman, but mailing it felt like the most important thing she'd ever done. The walk to the mailbox was the farthest she'd been from her house in 6 months. As she dropped the letter into the slot, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would live. Not just exist, but truly live, in honor of the love she still carried for her son. 3 weeks later, Ellen was washing dishes when she heard a knock at her front door. She'd grown so used to being alone that the sound startled her. Through the window, she could see a young woman standing on her front porch, holding what looked like a letter. Ellen's first thought was that it must be someone collecting for charity, but something about the woman's posture seemed different, more respectful, more patient. When Ellen opened the door, she found herself face to face with a beautiful woman with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Mrs. Morrison?" the woman asked gently. "My name is Whitney Houston. I got your letter." Ellen's knees nearly gave out. She had to grab onto the doorframe to keep from falling. This couldn't be real. This couldn't be happening. but the woman's voice was unmistakably the same voice that had saved Ellen's life 3 weeks earlier. "May I come in?" Whitney asked softly. "I'd love to talk with you if you have time." Ellen could only nod, stepping aside to let this impossible visitor into her humble home. Whitney looked around the small living room, taking in the photographs of Michael, the carefully preserved memories of a life interrupted by war. "You have a beautiful home," she said, and Ellen could tell she meant it. They sat in Ellen's living room, and for the next 2 hours, Whitney Houston listened to Ellen Morrison tell the story of her life. She listened to stories about Michael's childhood, about the dreams he'd had for his future, about the way losing him had broken something in Ellen that she'd never been able to repair. Whitney didn't interrupt, didn't check her watch, didn't seem to be anywhere else but completely present with this lonely old woman who had written her a letter. "Mrs. Morrison," Whitney said when Ellen had finished talking, "your letter made me cry, not just because of what you've been through, but because of your strength. To live with that kind of grief for 22 years and still have enough love left in your heart to reach out to a stranger, that's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." Ellen shook her head. "I don't feel strong. I feel broken." Whitney reached over and took Ellen's wrinkled hands in her young, smooth ones. "But don't you see? Broken things can still hold love. Sometimes they hold it even better because the cracks let the light shine through." Ellen had never heard anything so beautiful in her entire life. As their conversation continued, Whitney shared something that surprised Ellen. "You know, Mrs. Morrison, I've been struggling with something myself lately. Everyone expects me to be strong all the time, to have all the answers because I'm successful. But your letter reminded me that it's okay to be vulnerable, to admit when life feels overwhelming." Ellen reached over and patted Whitney's hand, the same gesture she'd used to comfort Michael when he was small. "Child, strength isn't about never falling down. It's about getting back up, even when you don't think you can." Whitney's eyes filled with tears. "My grandmother used to say something like that. She passed away last year, and I've missed having someone wise to talk to." In that moment, Ellen realized that Whitney hadn't just come to comfort her. She'd come seeking the kind of wisdom that only comes from surviving decades of heartbreak and choosing love anyway. Whitney told Ellen about the pressure of fame, about feeling isolated despite being surrounded by people, about wondering if her music truly mattered beyond entertainment. "When I read your letter," Whitney said, "I realized that's exactly why God gave me this voice. Not for the charts or the awards, but for moments like the one you had in your kitchen when someone needs to hear that they're loved." Ellen smiled through her tears. "That's the most beautiful thing I've ever heard, honey. Your voice isn't just a gift to you, it's a gift through you." Before Whitney left that day, she asked Ellen for her daughter-in-law's phone number. "Would it be okay if I called Jennifer? I'd like to tell her about you, about how proud she should be to have someone like you in her family." Ellen was terrified. She hadn't spoken to Jennifer in 6 months, and their last conversation had been so painful. But something about Whitney's confidence gave her hope. 2 days later, Ellen's phone rang for the first time in months. It was Jennifer, and she was crying. "Ellen, I'm so sorry. Whitney Houston called me. She told me about your letter, about what you've been going through. I had no idea. I thought I was protecting Sarah from your grief, but I was just being cruel." The conversation lasted 3 hours, and by the end, Jennifer had promised to bring Sarah for dinner the following Sunday. But Whitney wasn't finished with Ellen Morrison. Over the next 6 months, she called Ellen every few weeks, just to check in, just to talk. She sent Ellen a signed photograph with the inscription, "To Ellen, who taught me that love never dies, it just learns how to sing differently." She arranged for Ellen to attend one of her concerts in Chicago, where she dedicated "I Will Always Love You" to a very special lady who reminded me why I sing. The most incredible moment came when Sarah, Ellen's granddaughter, finally visited for that Sunday dinner. As they were looking through old photographs of Michael, Sarah suddenly looked up at her grandmother with tears in her eyes. "Grandma, I wish I could have known him. Tell me everything about my father." It was the first time Sarah had ever asked about Michael, the first time she'd shown any interest in the man she'd never really known. Ellen spent the evening telling Sarah stories about Michael's childhood, about his dreams, about the kind of man he'd been. And for the first time, instead of grief, Ellen felt joy in the telling. Whitney's words echoed in her mind. Love doesn't die. It just learns how to sing differently. Ellen realized she'd been trying to keep Michael alive by preserving his memory exactly as it was on the day he died. But what Michael needed wasn't a museum of grief. He needed his story to live on, to inspire and connect the people who loved him. Within a year, Ellen's life had transformed completely. She began volunteering at the VA hospital, visiting with elderly veterans who, like her, had lost children in various wars. She discovered that her gift for listening, honed by decades of grief, was exactly what these broken souls needed. She started a support group for military mothers who had lost children, providing a safe space for them to share their stories without judgment or advice, just pure understanding. Sarah began visiting regularly, bringing her own children to meet their great-grandmother. Ellen taught them about their grandfather Michael, not as a tragedy, but as a hero whose love continued to inspire his family. The house that had been a museum of sorrow became a living testament to love's ability to transcend death. Whitney kept in touch with Ellen for the rest of Ellen's life. She would call on Michael's birthday, on the anniversary of his death, and sometimes just because she was thinking about the letter that had changed both their lives. When Ellen was diagnosed with cancer at age 94, Whitney flew to Chicago to visit her in the hospital. They sat together in that sterile room, holding hands, two women from completely different worlds who had found each other through music and mutual understanding. "I want to thank you," Ellen said during that final visit, "for reminding me that life is worth living, even when it's hard." Whitney smiled through her tears. "You thanked me? Ellen, you taught me why I was given this voice. It wasn't just to entertain people. It was to heal them, to connect them, to remind them that they're not alone in their pain." Ellen Morrison died peacefully in 1997 at age 95, surrounded by her family. At her funeral, they played "I Will Always Love You," and not a single person could sing along because they were all crying too hard. Whitney Houston attended the funeral, sitting quietly in the back, honoring the woman who had taught her that music's greatest power isn't in the high notes or the applause, but in its ability to reach into someone's darkest moment and remind them that love is stronger than death. Sarah Morrison, inspired by her grandmother's story, became a music therapist, specializing in grief counseling for military families. She often tells her patients about her grandmother Ellen, about how a song on the radio saved a life, about how one letter connected two strangers and created a friendship that lasted 6 years. The Ellen Morrison Foundation, established in her memory, provides music therapy services to veterans and their families. Because Ellen understood better than anyone that music doesn't just entertain, it heals. Today, whenever "I Will Always Love You" plays on the radio, thousands of people think of their own lost loved ones and remember Ellen Morrison's lesson. Love doesn't die when someone dies. It transforms. It grows. It connects us across time and space and circumstance. Sometimes it even saves lives. One song, one voice, one moment of grace at a time. The bottle of sleeping pills that Ellen almost took that December morning in 1991 stayed on her kitchen table for months, not as a temptation, but as a reminder. A reminder that hope can come from the most unexpected places, that connection can happen between the most unlikely people, and that sometimes the voice of a stranger singing on the radio is actually the voice of love itself, calling us back to life when we've forgotten how to live. If this incredible story of music's power to heal and connect touched your heart, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that it's never too late for hope, never too late for love, and never too late for second chances. Have you ever had a song save your life or change your perspective? Tell us about it in the comments below, and don't forget to ring that notification bell for more amazing true stories about the healing power of music and human connection.